right, this is lesson 2. We're performing some basic operations like adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing on numbers in decimal form today. And learning some tricks to estimate the values and then do some mental math as well. So we're going to be working without a calculator today. So let's get started. So first thing we're going to do here is practice adding and subtracting. We have negative numbers here as well. First thing you always want to do when you're doing questions like this, especially ones that have a lot of decimals and a lot of chances to make mistakes, is just estimate. The reason we want to estimate is because once we actually do the calculation, we want to check. The estimate will help us check to see if our answer is reasonable and if we need to go back and check. All right, so negative 2.75 is pretty close to negative 3. And negative 4.81 is pretty close to negative 5. So if I was going to estimate this, it's nice to kind of go to whole numbers or integer numbers. So I would estimate negative 3 plus negative 5, which is negative 8. So that's my estimation of what I think this answer is going to be close to. Okay, next I'm going to calculate this exactly. Because both of these are negative numbers, I can just add them together and then make my answer negative. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set it up vertically because that's how I'm used to adding by hand. And I'm going to start with the numbers on the right hand side. So 1 plus 5 is 6. 7 plus 8 is 15. Carry the 1 and you get 7. Now, the final answer is going to be negative 7.56. It's negative again because both of these numbers were negative, and so the final answer is going to be negative. Okay, let's do the next one. Negative 5.21. That's kind of close to 5, negative 5. And I have negative 6.92, which is pretty close to negative 7. So if I was going to estimate this equation, I would make it negative 5 minus negative 7. Subtracting a negative is like adding, so this is hopefully going to be pretty close to 2. All right, let's see if our answer is close to 2. Also, just to make this simpler, we do have a negative and a negative here, so we can combine these, and it would be equivalent to doing this. Now, if you have a negative number and you're adding a positive number, what you'll end up doing is finding the difference between those two. And my answer, I expect it to be positive since the positive number is larger than the negative number. So when I set up I'm going to subtract here, actually. 6.92 minus 5.21. I'm going to do it in the other order so that it's easier to set it up. Okay, 2 minus 1 is 1. 9 minus 2 is 7, and 6 minus 5 is 1. And it is positive, and it is pretty close to 2, so I'm pretty confident in my answer. All right, good. So that's the kind of work you're going to be showing when you're estimating and then showing the exact calculation. All right, let's practice doing some multiplication. We have some tricks here to make this easier when we're doing it without a calculator. But first, before we do the calculations, we're going to estimate. So let's look for some benchmarks. So 0.4, I mean, that's not really close to 0 or 1, but it is pretty close to 0.5, which is kind of easy to work with. So I'm going to say that's pretty close to 0.5. And then negative 1 is kind of close to, negative 1.2 is kind of close to negative 1. So essentially here we're saying 0.5 times negative 1, which is negative 0.5. So that's my guess. It's going to be close to negative 0.5. So let's see what we get. All right, so when we're multiplying, what you can do here is move the decimal places over. So if I have 0.4 times negative 1.2, if I move the decimal places over 1, 2, and I just remember that. So I move the decimal places 2 to the right, and I get 4 times negative 12, and that's negative 48. That's not going to be my final answer. What my final answer will be is I'm going to move the decimal place 2 to the left. I'm going to move it back again. to reverse that process, and that's going to be my answer, negative 0.48. So if you move the decimals over to the right, you got to move them back again. You got to move it back again to write your final answer. So negative 0.48, and that is pretty close to my original estimate. So I'm feeling pretty confident about that. All right, let's practice that. Let's practice a division question. So again, we're going to estimate here. Negative 4.8 is around negative 5. And negative 0.8 is approximately, yeah, it's pretty close to negative 1. So what I'm doing here is negative 5 divided by negative 1, which is 5. So I'm looking for an answer that's pretty close to 5. Let's see what I get. When I do these questions, I really like to write them, the division, as like a fraction because it's easier for me to see. When we have a fraction, we are allowed to do the same thing to the numerator and denominator, and it's not going to change the answer. So here I'm going to multiply both the numerator and denominator by 10, and that's going to move the decimal place over 1, and then I won't have to deal with any decimals anymore. And then I can just answer the question. It's 6. 48 divided by 8 is 6, and it's pretty close to 5, so I'm pretty confident in my answer. So that's a good trick to use when you're dividing. All right, let's do a word problem. Okay, so it says on Saturday, I'm just going to highlight key things. The temperature at Okanagan Lake near Kelowna decreased by 1.8 degrees Celsius for 2.5 hours. It then decreased by 0.6 Celsius per hour for 3.5 hours. What was the total decrease in temperature? Okay, so we're going to have to do some multiplication here. First thing we're going to do is multiply negative 1.8 degrees Celsius per hour times the 2.5 hours that occurred. If I want to use my little trick that I used before, I'm going to move the decimal over one spot. So it'll be negative 18 times 25, and that is equal to 450. 4,500 actually. Yeah, 450. And then I'm going to move the decimal spot place back. So it's going to be 4.5 degrees Celsius. So we know the temperature decreased by 4.5 degrees Celsius in that first part. And now for the second part, we're going, negative, yeah. We decreased by 0.6 degrees Celsius per hour times 3.5 hours, and we can use that same trick again. Move the decimal place over 1, so we don't have to worry about any decimals, and so you'll end up with negative 6 times 35. 2 times 35 is 70, and 70 times 3 is 210, so it'd be negative 210, and I'm going to move the decimal place back 2 positions to reverse what I did originally. So it'll be negative 2.1 degrees Celsius. So in total, the total decrease in temperature, is we're going to add those together, negative 4.5 plus negative 2.1, negative 6.6. That's the total decrease in temperature. Okay. And B, what was the average rate of decrease in temperature per hour? So this happened over a total of 6 hours. 2.5 hours plus 3.5 hours is 6 hours. So what we're going to do is divide negative 6.6 degrees Celsius, and that happened over the course of 6 hours. We can use that little trick if we want it to not deal with any decimal numbers. Multiply by 10 in the numerator and denominator. We'll end up with negative 66 over 60, and that is 1.1. Degrees Celsius per hour. Okay, so that's the rate of change. So every hour, on average, the temperature decreased by 1.1 degrees Celsius. All right, that is the end of the lesson.